So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the interpersonal mode from the classroom to online learning. I'm Lavinia Rogers. I'm the World Language Specialist at the Maine Department of Education, and I'm joined by Emma. Emma, you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Emma Banks. I'm the Secondary Digital Learning and Computer Science Specialist.
So I am going to be toggling back and forth from sharing my screen, but then also having you guys do some activities, because what I'm really hoping that we'll have an opportunity, to do today is to really talk about what the interpersonal mode was before all of this craziness happened, and what it can look like regardless of the situation that you might find yourself in the fall, but also to explore a little bit and discuss, because I know that you guys have had a lot of experience over the last couple of months, whether you wanted it or not, around how to instruct using in a remote learning environment. So I'm going to ask you to go to the Padlet, and if you, I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually put it in the chat here for just a second. Sorry. Everyone. So you can find that link there. And what I'm asking you to do is to take a minute and think about what the interpersonal mode looked like when you were in your classroom. How did your students practice it? How did they show what they were able to do in the interpersonal mode? And you just want to post those on the Padlet. So if you open up the chat box at the bottom of your screen, you should see the link in the chat box to the Padlet, and that would allow you to actually go to the actual document. Thank you for that question, Celia.
Thank you.
Cecilia, sorry.
Yeah.
Tati, tell me more. What do you mean by fluid?
I'm talking to the computer. I'm working on it. Hold on. Just
okay. Emma, can I ask a question? If there's two anonymous right beside it, does that mean that one's posted on top of the other? Like if you look at my screen over on the left-hand side. Oh, it disappeared. Maybe it was just a lapse on my part.
No, that was me. I was on top of someone. I just dragged it over. I'm in the middle of typing something.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully it didn't disappear. Okay.
Yeah, depending on how the Padlet is configured, you can sometimes stack them, so.
I chose the most free range one, which, you know, good or bad, we'll find out. Awesome. We're seeing a lot of variety of groupings, conversations with the teacher. The word spontaneous, which I think some of us have been missing the last couple of months for the interpersonal mode. So as you finish up with the putting in your thoughts, please continue to put them in. But if you can just kind of pull your post over so that other people can see it, and then take a minute and read what other people have also written, because we're going to take a minute and discuss what it is that we noticed. Yes, we are definitely missing those human connections right now. Although I must admit, it is very nice to see you all, even if I can't like be in the same place as you. Okay. So what is it that you notice as you are looking at people's responses?
Lavinia, what was the question again? I'm sorry.
Yep.
I was reading.
Yeah, as you're reading it over, what is it that you're noticing about people's responses? What's sticking out to you?
I think when we have the students in the classroom, we have more opportunities to have a variety of activities, because you can just organize activities easily with the students, pair them in group, in debates, I don't know, role play, all of those kind of activities that you are there in the present. It's easy for us comparing to the online. In engagement, you can supervise. I mean,
Other thoughts?
Well, I was not able to do any interpersonal anything when I was online. It was not mandatory for the kids to come, so they didn't. They slept in, they got up at 2 in the afternoon, that kind of thing. So no, I didn't do any. It was pretty sad. And I know that other colleagues of mine had the same experience. So the middle school teachers even told me not to, they're not going to talk to me in the fall. They forgot how. So yeah, it's been very, very difficult to do it. And I don't know how to fix that really, except to make it that the schools make the meetings mandatory. So at least if you have 5, you can create little groups of 5 or 6 kids and then get us talking together. But if it's going to be asynchronous and show up if you feel like it, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, even if they had, I don't know, can you hear me? Oh, okay. So even if they had, like, out of 15 weeks or 16 weeks, if they said you have to attend 10 sessions online, there has to be some kind of number that the kids have to show up. Otherwise, they're just not going to show up. And mostly this past quarter when they got passing grades, if they got a 60, that was all they were going to do.
Catherine and Cecilia, did you notice anything, like as you're looking at other people's posts, were you thinking
It's
like,
because
oh,
I couldn't figure out how to post one. I do a lot of the same things. I teach Spanish, so, but are you talking about in the classroom or online?
Right now we're talking about what we did in our classrooms before all this craziness happened. And so I was wondering if you guys saw things that other people had put that you were using in your classroom.
I do a lot of, just discussions and debates and, oral review of stories. Can't think right now. Role playing. And then, a picture that one person describes to another, and the other person has to try to replicate it.
So just like recognizing that Padlet is different, right? And if we're not used to it, and that's my bad. I did a really bad teacher move because I did not allow you to kind of, like, I didn't model for you, this is how you do a post, or say that you could see what everybody was posting if you stayed in Padlet and not necessarily in the Zoom window. So I apologize for
That's okay.
showing poor teacher moves on my part. Clearly I'm still getting used to this delivering PD online. But I do appreciate you guys jumping in. I am gonna stop sharing the Padlet. I do want us to kind of think about all those things that we were doing before the classroom, because there are ways that we can carry those things over, right? Like, we don't have to completely reinvent how we do the interpersonal mode just because we're teaching remotely. But we also need to name that there's some things that are just going to be different and are going to be a little bit more challenging at the same time. And that's okay. So if you want to continue to look at the Padlet, if you stay on that link, you'll be able to see it. I am going to take us to the PowerPoint to kind of continue the conversation. So I want to start here with just kind of reframing for ourselves and what the interpersonal mode is, and really kind of grounding ourselves in what communication is and what the purpose, and noting that this is from Bill Van Patten, who wrote, while we're on the topic, he also has 2 podcasts that you might listen to, but kind of that idea that it's expression, it's interpretation. When we're engaged in the interpersonal mode, it's the expression, it's the interpretation, it's the negotiation of meaning, but there's always that purpose for whatever the context is, right? And he goes on to say that there's 3 particular purposes that we might engage in communication with. And so when we're thinking about that, we have that spontaneity of the conversation, right? It is not something that we have rehearsed beforehand, before sending that text message or before speaking whatever the thought is on our mind. And we're actively thinking about, like, whether or not we're understanding that message and whether or not the person that we're talking to is understanding that message, and then adjusting what we need to do and clarifying when it's needed. And just recognizing that speaking, signing, and listening is part of the interpersonal mode, as well as the reading and writing. So we're pulling on, like, multiple skills when we're talking about this mode. I also just want to name that I am going to provide some resources for the writing interpersonal mode, but we're not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about it today, just because the one that I think has been most challenging for teachers, and I could be wrong, is that interpersonal speaking. Like, how do we figure out how to do this if we're not going to be in a classroom in the fall, or if we're going to be in a hybrid situation, those kinds of things. And again, if we're lucky enough to be back in our classroom, hopefully just kind of thinking about, like, how are we using this interpersonal mode? So the challenges that we've had for the last couple of months is keeping that spontaneity. Sometimes there's limitations of technology, right? That if we can't, or limitations of school policy. So, like, if we can't use Zoom because our school district decided that it didn't, or that because it doesn't meet certain requirements from our school district, and we ended up with Google Meets, then Google Meets doesn't have some of the same features like the breakout rooms or whatever. All of those are limitations that might have prevented us from, like, exploring that mode. And then the other issue is monitoring, right? Like, we know how to move around a classroom and listen to, like, what kids are saying and do all those things, but how do you do that in a virtual space? And I will tell you, it is challenging, right? Like, right now I am scrolling through all of your pictures so I can gauge, like, how you guys are doing while I'm trying to talk and not mess up my screen, right? There's a lot of things going on. And so we just want to name those challenges. and I think the other thing that we need to name is that, and I said this once before, is that it's going to look different, especially the spontaneity piece. Unless we're willing to dedicate a considerable amount of time to like making that happen. And I mean like engaging in those video conferencing or setting up an opportunity for students to video conference with somebody else in the target language. And so we just need to name that is definitely one of the challenges. But at the same time, we don't want everything to just be presentational speaking, because what we know about our students is that they want to be able to communicate. They want to be able to walk up to somebody and be able to have that conversation with somebody else from another country. They don't want to just be making presentations to those people. So just a little bit more framing before we move on. When we're looking at like the characteristics of the interpersonal mode, so in novice, we know that they are able to have conversations about those very familiar topics. And as we move to intermediate, they're able to have conversations on familiar topics, right? So we need to keep these things in mind when we're talking to our kids about, or setting up tasks for our kids to do, right? Like if we push them or provide too much of a challenge, we're going to have some problems in how they execute it. And we need to think about like, what are those supports based on their proficiency level? So novice, again, practiced memorized phrases, simple questions, versus an intermediate who's got sentences and series of sentences. We have listing and naming versus being able to initiate, maintain, and end a conversation. And then on the novice side, again, we're functioning in basic topics on basic biographical information. And, oops, sorry, too many things on my screen. For intermediate, it's all about me, right? Everything related to how I do things and how I interact with the environment. That's why why me is in the middle of the word intermediate. And then for novice, if they get stuck, if the activity is too challenging or they don't have enough resources, they're going to resort to things like gesturing, their first language, or trying to imitate, right? Like we know novice is the parrot in the conversation when they're having a conversation, versus an intermediate who is going to self-correct, sometimes recognize that they're going to self-correct when they make a mistake. Sometimes they're going to do it to improve, and sometimes they're not. And so they're going to use those strategies of restating and circumlocution. And so again, I know that you guys know this, but I'm reminding you of it because when we're thinking about what we're asking students to do, especially when we're not right there on the path with them, we have to really be cognizant of what we're asking and what they're able to do at the moment. It doesn't mean that we don't provide the supports to get or lose sight of where we want them to go. We just got to make sure that we're being intentional with our support. So you are going to do your first exploration, all right? And I am going to share that slide again in just a minute. I just wanted to grab the link so that I can put it in the chat for you. Okay, I am sharing the link, but please don't click on it just yet. Okay, so here we go. So what I'm going to ask you to do is you're going to be broken into breakout rooms. And I want you to take some time to introduce yourself and discuss what you enjoy about the summer. Okay, and what I want you to really focus on is building consensus about what you and your group enjoy. And you're going to end up writing whatever it is that you enjoy in the box to the left of the number of people that agree with you. So for instance, and this is me modeling or trying to, if I was talking with Emma and Allison, for instance, and I said, I like or I enjoy all the bugs of summer, right? And Emma and Allison looked at me and went, no, we don't enjoy that. I'm not going to write that item next to anybody because nobody happens to agree with me, which is perfectly fine, right? But if I said, I like being, or I enjoy being outside, you know, Allison's like, yeah, me too. But Emma's like, absolutely not. I'm going to write being outside next to that one person agrees with me, because in my group, Allison's the only person that agrees with me. And if I say I enjoy the sun, or somebody else says I enjoy the sun, and we all agree, I'm going to put two people, I'm going to put the sun next to the two people that agree with me. Right? Are there any questions?
Yes, are we gonna have that box to write in the breakout room?
Yes, when you click on the link that I put in the chat, it'll take you directly to the box.
Okay, so it will be a separate window.
Yes.
Okay. All right,
License was excited because
So there would be what you're going to see is you're going to see two things. You're going to see the Google spreadsheet, and you'll also see the people that you're going to talk to in your group. Does that help, Eunice?
yes, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, so this is the first time that you guys are getting to, you know, have a chance to chat. So I'm going to put a little bit more time on it than I would normally. And then so that you guys can, you know, introduce yourselves or say hi, chat a little bit before you jump into the activity. All right, so here we go. Okay. So you are going to get an invitation, and you want to click accept on the invitation, and then you should appear in a new box. You can also open up the chat box once you're in breakout rooms. Tati, are you all set? I think Marie stepped away for a minute. I'm still getting used to the share mode. I apologize. So I want you to look at your responses from your group, or think of the conversation from your group if you were in a group that had trouble writing in. And in the chat, what statement can you make about what your group enjoys about summer? Emma, for some reason, I can't get my chat to show up. Oh, wait, there. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you share your screen, the chat sometimes is just so finicky.
Okay. I'm glad that it wasn't just me.
Definitely not you. I've gotten so frustrated about that before.
Awesome. So I could extend this to like to have them also like look at the class as a whole, to kind of think about like what is it as a class, like what does it say about what we enjoy doing in the summertime, or how we spend our time in the summer. And so again, that's something that they've had a discussion, they've filled out the chart, but now it's like bringing it back to so that we can have a discussion, right? I could go on to like, Allison, tell me more, like what where do you go dancing, right? Or, you know, what are you growing in your garden? Is it Shirley, did I say that right? Or Shirley, did I say your name right? Okay. Tati, I love that thought. We're headed there next. So the other thing that to kind of add into this is to give our students, to give us a chance to reflect, right? So like, what is it, what knowledge did you learn? What questions did you have or clarifications that you need? What strategies worked for you? And then kind of at the end of the lesson, like, how did you feel about today's lesson, right? To give them a chance to kind of self-identify. And the reason I bring this up is that we've had a lot of, we're so used to giving our students feedback, but like they are now working largely on their own, or working more on their own than they have been in the past. And so like we have to kind of build those skills within them to really think and monitor their own learning. And these questions can help to do that. I could also have given them the can do statement and kind of say like, can you do this? Not yet, or, I can do this easily, kind of thing, to get them to reflect on the specific skills that they were using. So I have definitely talked way too much. What I want us to think about or discuss is, what did we notice? And this is your student hat. Like, what did you notice as you participated in the first exploration?
I noticed that we have a lot in common.
And it was very spontaneous. I mean, it was an opportunity just to share what we like or what we do.
Right.
So very engaging on the topic.
Mm-hmm. Very familiar.
Yeah, it was fun to be in a small group like that.
Mm-hmm.
It encouraged chatting.
I like the fact when Jennifer said she moved and to North Carolina, right? And my other friend, I don't remember her name. I forget her name. Not Michelle.
Okay.
She likes to garden. That was Jennifer, Michelle, Shirley, and somebody else. And she stopped. That was not part of the discussion, but she congratulated her. Like, it was a whole conversation, like cheering each other. So that was very nice of her to do that.
Well, but hi, I'm Tati.
Tati, yes.
Hi. No, but that's like we said before, right? That what is the purpose of us talking? Is to maintain relationships. If somebody I know says, I moved to North Carolina, I'm going to say, how come? That is the natural approach of speaking. I'm not going to go, hey, right? Because we're not robots. So, yeah. Anyway, I'll shut up.
But that was very interesting. Yeah, I like it. Yeah.
Tatya, you bring up a good point, right? Like when I said at the beginning, like I'm giving you more time than I would have normally, right? Because you guys need to socialize as well, right? Like you know each other, or you're meeting for the first time. And so it's like, take care, like those things are normal. And so padding that time and recognizing that that's what we need is important, right? Yeah. What else did you notice? Michelle, we can't hear you.
It was fun to be without the teacher for a little bit. And maybe less nervous to talk because the teacher wasn't listening.
I noticed that I really liked having a very directed question, because it takes a little bit of the anxiety away of saying, instead of saying, just go into this room and talk to each other and introduce yourselves and say hi. It was nice to have a very directed question to answer, just to get things going.
I think that if I were to do this with my students, I would probably give them like 2 minutes to maybe jot down a list of items that they do in the summer that they like to do, and that in the target language, and that way they have something there. And maybe they might come up with more unique or more variety, instead of, play video games and watch Netflix, which is what, a lot of people say. But if you give them a few minutes to jot down, and I always try to tell them, if I could teach kids how to use what they know and not insist on using words they don't know, come up with all those activities that you know how to say, and that, if you don't know how to scuba dive right now, let's put that on the side burner and let's talk about going for a walk or working in the garden or whatever it is. Yeah.
That's a great transition, Christine. And I know, Tati, you were referencing things before, but like, what did it spark in you as a teacher, right? Because to be completely transparent, I would not give this to my French students the way that I'm giving it to you in English, right? You guys have a facility with English. You're adults. So like, I wouldn't necessarily, I would put a lot more structure into place in order to help them to succeed. So I could give them a similar topic, but I could ask them to come to a consensus about things that they like about summer, but I'm going to still put a lot of supports in place. So what sparked it with you? And thank you, Christine, for that great segue.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Well, I will be giving like an assignments. I will say, if I'm doing groups of 3, each of them has to pick A, B, or C. And then I will say, okay, C is gonna be in charge of taking notes. And first, I would like to try the site, because I know my students, if they start immediately to try to get the typing, if they are not succeeding about typing or getting the document to work, they're gonna be spending a lot of time trying to figure it out. And I don't know how to get them back to me to tell me if there is something wrong with that. We were able just to continue talking because we are teachers. we keep in the task, but for the students, that technical part, I think is important to have just piloting first and then jump to the activity, or have a mechanism for the students to report to the teacher in case that they don't know how to, or they have difficulties on the technical part.
I would revert to paper and pencil myself, but then I'm really old fashioned that way. I think that the technology piece, I probably would have said to the kids, and if it doesn't work, just write it down and we can share orally, because, that's the whole point anyway. One thing I would also do is to give them if they don't have it, the I agree, I don't agree phrase, because, just because I don't know that my students would have known to say, it depends on the level, but je suis d'accord, je ne suis pas d'accord. So kind of pre-think what gambits they might need to get the conversation done, and pre-feed those, or have them have a little chat mat that they might bring out or whatever, just to support that conversation.
Can I add one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
I have to be transparent. In Google Classroom, we don't have Breakout Room, right? So while I was in the room and I was thinking about it, and I said, will I trust my students being there by themselves? I might probably, come in and check on them. And then later on, while we're talking now, I feel like I have to be, how can I say, we learn, or how can I say this? What's the best word to say? Like, change my frame, kind of. It's a new day, it's a new time. I have to trust the kids. It's a tool that's available. Why not use it? And I don't have to be like a sergeant on top of them if we want to kind of give them the tool to become independent citizens. So they have to start now. So I have to kind of thinking deeply about it and then say, okay, Shirley, yes, they can do it. Yes, you can do it. Let them do it. If they're in the room by themselves, you give them direction, trust them, they'll come back with the answers.
Emma, not to put you on the spot, but because we talked about digital citizenship in one of our other sessions, and I hear what you're saying, Shirley. Like, this is, there are certain things that we have to teach our kids, right? And how to be good digital citizens is one of those things. Just like how we have to teach them, how to agree with somebody, or how to ask questions. So Emma, do you have anything to add in terms of, like, does this go into the realm of digital citizenship when we're in a Zoom breakout room?
Yes, correct. Correct.
Yeah.
You get it. I'm writing it down as a note for me to remind myself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it comes down to that student agency, kind of like showing them that they need to own their work and their contributions and stuff, like having them realize that they're kind of the pilot of their learning, which I think speaks to that shift in mindset that Shirley mentioned. It can be kind of hard to make that shift, but in the remote setting, the student has to be engaged. They have to be intrinsically motivated. So integrating those expectations and the responsibilities that they have to engage with their learning can certainly be integrated into things like your norms and expectations. So that might help set your framework for being able to trust your students because you have established that.
Yes, Emma, thank you so much.
So any other thoughts about something that it sparked in you in your teacher brain? Go ahead, Tati.
I would add to what Emma was saying. Definitely the expectations are very important. As a newbie on this, I had a group of students that they would not hang up, leave the chat. And we were, no, you cannot, you have to be the last one to close it, blah, blah, blah. And for 10, 15 minutes, okay, guys, bye. And they just wouldn't. So it's like, okay, that's on me because I didn't say once we're done, we are done. But they are so resourceful. They'll try to get you at every step of the way. So yes, expectations, especially digitally, clear and concise from the beginning, I think are a must.
I would just consider, Lavina, this reminds me of a good reason to have a positive reward system where you catch people that are good, and then I would love to look more into that if anyone's creating something for the digital world and how they can actually see it, or go into a web page every so often to see which team's winning or something, because I think that's really key to the culture of this. Hopefully our districts will support us with good ethics online, which we didn't have available before. And then we can just kind of enrich that in our classrooms.
Yeah, so there are definitely people that are doing that work. And I can send you a link to one of the webinars that was done with the department a couple of weeks ago, if you're interested. But I just lost my thought. Tati said something that had me, so when you were talking about setting up those expectations, that's something that we're used to doing in our classrooms, right? It's just that now we got to think about it, because we know the beginning of the year, we're going to teach some content, but we're going to spend a lot of time setting those expectations, explaining why we're doing what we're doing, setting those routines in place. And, when we take that time, it pays off dividends. And so thinking of the fall, it's again doing the same thing. It's just what do we need to do now in the virtual space that we probably didn't have to do before, or just tweaking the conversation so that we're talking about the virtual space and not just the in-person space. So thank you for that, both Shirley and Tati, for that reminder of setting those expectations. I do want to give us an opportunity to kind of share what have been your successes with interpersonal speaking, but I want to share two things before we get to that. So I will come back to it. The one thing that as I was preparing for this, I was what is it that I really want people to take away? And that is that planning with a purpose, right? I don't know about you, but I was one of those teachers that was always turn and talk with your partner. And but I didn't always I would give them I would ask a question, or I would, say, talk about your weekend, turn and talk with your partner. But that wasn't necessarily enough of a purpose, because I would monitor the space and I would see what was happening. And so to really just kind of think about what is it that you want your students engaging in as they're creating that interpersonal, as they're engaging in an interpersonal mode and really being very intentional about what you're asking them to do. And if you're, as a resource, like you can look at the accessible can-do statements and you can see like those questions, like, are they exchanging information? Are they, you know, expressing and reacting, you know, doing more of a social thing and building relationships with people, which is what our activity was, right? Like ours was a social activity. It was not necessarily an informational activity. Gave you a chance to get to know people. And I could see what you did as a result of that conversation. And that's part of planning with a purpose. Like I knew what I wanted, if in teacher talk, like I wanted you to be able to talk about your preferences, but the outcome that I was looking for was like, can you build consensus about what it is that you like to do? Can you agree and disagree and voice those things, if I were to put it into teacher talk? The other thing is, and this goes back to like what Michelle was saying, is alignment of values and actions. And what I mean by that is that there are certain things that we know are going to help our kids to learn language, right? You got to take risks. You got to make mistakes. You know, you got to just to practice as much as you can, because that's what's going to make things better, right? And so like, if those are the things that we know about learning a language, and there are others, then we need to make sure that we're like really aligning all of our practices around doing that. So it's not about, you know, you did this perfectly, or, you know, you forgot to say this versus this. It's like, you know what, I could understand what you were saying and you got your point across. And really, you know, and really focusing on them like taking that risk. One of the things I used to always say to my kids is like, I love the fact that you realize that you made a mistake and that you tried to fix it, right? That like, that tells me that you are in that, you know, intermediate area. You're thinking about what you're saying. You're not just saying it. And then you recognize that you made a mistake. It doesn't matter if you didn't make it better, right? But you recognize that you made a mistake, or just saying like, I could see that you could tell something wasn't quite right. And you kept going, and that's okay. And so just kind of like really thinking about what it is that we're messaging to our kids about language learning. So this will be in the slide that I'll share with you, but these are some writing resources and then some interpersonal speaking resources. Again, that being the focus of what we were doing here. So I know you guys know some of these already. I do just want to bring in the chat. Sorry, Tati, you mentioned this word and now I can't remember it, but like the placemats or the chat. Thank you. If that was new to you, you can check out the podcast around building classroom discourse community. And there's some examples. These are in English, but they can be translated into any language. There's also plenty in the target language that you probably don't even need to do all that work. And then just bringing to attention, like, since we are doing video conferencing, like where are those opportunities to connect with those native speakers? So Global Connect, Dreamwakers, or having a partner school through like one of our embassies or through the Department of Education or through your own personal network. And so the last thing that I want to leave you with is not knowing where we're going to be in the fall. Those top two things, plan with purpose, align what we value in language learners with what we do in our classroom. And then if you happen to find yourself in that hybrid situation, really thinking purposefully, like, what do you need to do in person? And the interpersonal mode would be one of those things that would be a really good idea to do in the classroom versus like, what can students do independently? And just kind of like being really intentional about the choices if you are going to be one of those schools that's going to, you know, be in person and hybrid or some variation of those kind of things. So Emma, I know I went through the resources real fast. Is there anything that you want to add?
Yeah.
No, I think that this conversation has been great. I think everyone's really on the right track with thinking about things. And I think that the point that I would emphasize is what you just said about being really purposeful when you're bringing your students together and trying to make the most of that time.
I have a quick question because I'm not real familiar with Zoom. And when you do the breakout sessions, I'm thinking about the whole accountability piece. And I know this is recorded. When you record, do you also get a recording of the breakout rooms? What if they press record?
Oh.
That is a really good question. I'm not entirely sure if you could do a recording while a recording is in progress.
Because I know in Google Classroom, I've had my kids get on without me, meet at a certain time in like upper levels and then hit record. It comes to me because I created it. So I didn't know if they hit record in those breakout sessions, if that would go to Lavinia, since she's created the breakout sessions in the Zoom link, because that would be a great way to, for holding them accountable. And, guys, just, the first step is to hit record, and I'm going to be able to go back and listen to this and see, that you're on task and who's in the target language and blah, blah, blah. But yeah.
So that's a great question, Christine. I don't know if I know the answer to it. Does anybody else know?
I don't.
Okay. If you want to engage in a little bit of an experiment, Christine, we can do that.
Sure.
Because what I'm noticing by next to your name from my angle, I do have the option to allow you to record, which is interesting. I know that like when I'm facilitating, I stop the recording before I go to the breakout rooms because I figure whoever's watching it that would be like really jarring to like all of a sudden like,
right,
see what it just doesn't make sense for the recording part of it. But
right,
we can experiment, Christine, in a couple of minutes and find out.
Sure, and I think and I might be wrong, but you have to have a professional license, right, to do the breakout room? Because I have Zoom. I've used it, but I can't do the breakout sessions because I don't have that.
No, you can do breakout sessions on your private account.
Really? Because I tried.
You have to set up in the back end. There's a lot of back end stuff with Google. And just as a side note, like my district took off the recording feature completely for all teachers, all students, because they didn't want anybody recording students.
Yeah, and we were asked to record all our sessions and post them on Classroom.
It's so crazy how you could get total opposite ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
But they probably didn't know what the teaching advantages are.
Of course.
And then maybe some policy where we promise not to send it out to parents or something. So we'll see what happens this year.
Exactly.
We were all learning, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Go ahead, Tati.
Quick question. What is extempore?
Oh, yes. So this is not the department endorsing a product, but it is the closest thing that you can get to an interpersonal speaking because it allows you to limit the number of times that somebody hears the prompt, and it allows you to create that spontaneity by giving them like, you now have like 20 seconds to record your response or something like that. And so it really kind of like forces that issue of listening, figuring out what's saying, and then producing within a time frame similar to like what we're doing now. But when you're learning a language, you sit there and go, what's that word? Let me look it up.
But it costs money, right? You have to pay for it.
It does. It is a for-profit.
I heard it's really good though.
Yeah, there is a free trial, but unfortunately it's something that costs money. The Google Voice, you can do, it is free, but it's not an interaction, right? It's like if you call my voicemail and say, and so like if you call my Google Voice and you hear, "Hi, how are you? What are you planning to do this weekend?" Beep, and then you have to respond, right? I can see how many times a kid calls back to hear that same prompt, and I can, and then I can hear like that pause before they like actually start saying something, but it's only one exchange, right? But it still gets at that spontaneity that we've been missing, right? So, and Google Voice is free, and you can have it connect to your phone as well, so that you're not like having to go online to check messages or check text messages and things like that. other questions? Marie, I saw your question. I'm going to send out the slides. Is that good? Okay. Any other questions? Okay.
Oh.
Sorry, let me just put the link for feedback so that you can tell me what I did well and not so well.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, can I just ask you about the record button? So when you record, it comes back to you, or do you share it with the students that aren't there? Because I never hit record.
Yes. I did that with my, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. So we had a meeting with my rising AP students, and a couple of them weren't able to make it, but it was a mandatory meeting. So I recorded the meeting, emailed it to them, and it came back to me, and they were able to watch it and then respond to my questions about it to essentially prove that they attended the meeting.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So it does work.
Good.
And for me, I just uploaded it onto my Google Classroom, and I just had a folder that had recorded classes. So if a student missed a class, they could go back, or if they didn't understand a concept, they could go back and look at all our classes over again.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. So there's a link for feedback in the chat, if you wouldn't mind telling me what I did well and what I can work on. And then if you want to hang out for our breakout room recording experiment, stay with us.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks. Nice chatting.
Have a good summer.